Trove's combat and how you build classes can be broken up into 3 categories. Speed farming, where you're trying to complete dungeons as fast as possible, which means you need to have a class that has a good base movement speed and you will be sacrificing damage for more speed. Delves, which is a combination of damage and health. In most cases, you need to be really tanky to be able to survive the long, drawn-out gauntlet. And Leviathans are all about damage. You don't need to survive if you can kill it before it kills you. The efficiency of a class can basically be broken down into these 3 categories. Some will be stronger than others in one area and weaker in another. Another video of mine that I would recommend is the classes cheat sheet. It's basically a visual graph that kind of shows where each character fits in the spectrum. At the end of it all, I would always recommend that you play the class that you enjoy, rather than picking something specifically because it's efficient. So assuming you've picked out your main, let's get started with the more detailed tutorial. The Revenant. Yet another class that you would think would not go underestimated, considering how much of an absolute beast it is. I think a lot of people really underestimate Revenant simply because it wasn't very good back in the day. On top of that, it's also a very slow class, so you won't really see people using it for speed farming. But trust me when I say that it's actually really good at handling both delves and bosses. The main reason being is that it has an innate ability of lifesteal, so having that with the lifesteal we'll get out of the skill tree, and we'll talk about that later, makes the Revenant a force to be reckoned with. So first of all, what would we use for the subclass ability? Well, it's pretty much gonna be the same as every other character. You can use the Solarian subclass just to have that extra light value, but it also does do a damage over time effect, which can be pretty good. I, in most cases, will use the Knight subclass ability because of the mount movement speed, especially with how slow Revenant can be at its base movement speed, but the extra Flask capacity helps too. The Lunar Lancer subclass ability is once again a really solid one, just because when you have the lunacy mode trigger, you're gonna get big and you're gonna deal heaps of damage. But don't underestimate some of the other ones. Bard is one that lots of people always advocate just because it can give you decent movement speed, but it's pretty random. I would say don't underestimate the Pirate Captain's subclass ability because it can secretly do quite a bit of damage. Now, your gear stat priority on the Revenant is going to be fairly easy to build because you need to have nothing but attack speed and either crit damage when you're fighting bosses and what have you. But if you absolutely want to use this class for speed farming, you would simply swap the crit damage off of your gear for movement speed. In both cases, you want to have attack speed because your left click is going to be where you get your primary amount of damage. Now, going through the Revenant's crystal ring effects, we've got Speed Spears, which makes it so that your Spirit Spears will no longer give you the movement speed penalty. Spirit Squad, which has Spirit Storm summons a group of tiny wraith spirits, and Vengeful Storm, which makes it so that when at low health, Spirit Storm is automatically triggered, but it does have an internal cooldown. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, none of these matter that much. If I had to pick one, I guess I would say Speed Spears, just because that movement speed penalty is pretty bad. But the thing is that in most cases, the only time that you would use your Spirit Spears is when you're locking in and fighting against like a boss or something. The best banner in slot, and you'll excuse me for swapping my Shadow Hunter, is going to end up being Torches from Leviathans, Permatorch being the best, of course. And in my opinion, I always end up using the Enshrouded Knotted Shadow one because it ends up giving you movement speed, and that's something that I highly prioritize on all my characters, regardless of if they're speed farmers or not. Your best ally in slot can either be the Mini Fire Mana Beast, which is going to give you, I think, the highest damage output in the game in terms of an ally. Coming over here from the hub, there's going to end up being this basement down here with all the fishing stuff, and all the way down at the bottom is going to end up being the Fire Mana Beast at the Mystic Arts table. But a super safe, easy one is going to end up being Scorpius. And from the hub over here is the Grand Orrery with the skill tree, and there's Scorpius, which you're gonna inevitably end up getting because of the light stat value. Speaking of the skill tree, it's pretty much unanimously going to end up being the same for everybody. But what I like to prioritize is the Life Leech node, the movement speed nodes, the light nodes, and the damage nodes. In some cases, you can sacrifice the movement speed nodes for a little bit of extra damage, but again, I always prioritize movement speed myself. For your Flask options, pretty much any of these are going to be your best bet. I, in most cases, choose Death Defying because everything will one-shot you. But as a Revenant, you should have some significant survivability because when you have your Spirit Spears down and your basic attack and the life steal that you have out of the skill tree on top of the base life steal of the class, you can get away with the Elysian Bandolier just to have more Flask, because in most cases you won't be using it for healing as much. But you know, it's still kind of a pick your poison situation because you still might end up getting killed. Conjurer's Crucible is also a really good one just because it'll trigger anytime you get Magic Find, you might get more Flask. So people like using that for longevity of farming. And for the emblems, we pretty much are always stuck using Martial at least just because we need to have that raw damage now. But your secondary emblem will vary depending on what point you are in the game. Trailblazing, for example, is really good if you're trying to speed farm with this class. Unyielding Emblem, if you absolutely need that survivability, especially in super deep delves. I honestly don't know why I even have Chromatic equipped, but Sure Strike Emblem will also be a good one if you're early on in the game and don't have much crit hit. Speaking of crit hit and various other stats, the mid-game stat goal you should be aiming for is anywhere between 50% crit hit and up, crit damage around 800%, and physical damage at, say, 50 to 60, maybe 80%, or 80,000, sorry. Again, this is just kind of a mid ballpark. Like if you notice one of these stats is way too high in comparison to the others, that might be why you're struggling at the mid portion of the game. Later in the game, of course, it's a lot more nuanced. Now, before we end up talking about gems and what have you, I gotta mention, as always, get your class to level 30 first, okay? Because everyone's always like, hey, how do I make my character stronger? I'm at like 15 KPR or whatever. And in most cases, they're never max level. Max level lets you equip all of your gems, which gives you the most significant power boost. I also need to reiterate that these videos are not about the most coefficient classes possible, because when it comes to coefficiency, it gets very, very specific for each individual class because their stats vary ever so slightly. I will have a guide, hopefully in the future, that focuses on coefficiency, but as of right now, we're just gonna try and make this as digestible as possible. So I'm gonna swap to my Shadow Hunter here, and you don't have to follow these gem stat boosts to the letter. For all of your colored in powered gems, not including the Cosmic Gem, I would go for 2 boost physical, 1 boost crit damage, no boost crit hit until you have 100% crit hit, and then you can cycle any extra crit hit into max health. Ignore the boost that I have on my gems and listen to the words, okay? And then for the lesser gems, I like to say do 3 this way and 3 this way because there's a total of 6 lesser gems, again, not including the Cosmics. So 3 of those lesser gems would be the same as the Empower gems. 2 boost physical, 1 boost crit damage, no boost crit hit. And then the other 3 lesser gems would instead be 2 boost crit damage, 1 boost physical, no boost crit hit. If your gem stat boosts slightly vary, it doesn't really matter that much. You're just trying to kind of have a nice balance between the physical damage and crit damage that you have. And every single one of the Cosmic Gems is going to have all boosts into light with no boost physical and crit damage. As for the Empowered Gem abilities, honestly speaking, the Class Gem kind of sucks because the reason why players don't really utilize the right click or the shield bash with the Revenant is because it's not affected by attack speed, and so it's actually more beneficial to just drop down your spears and then hold left click rather than even bothering throwing your shield down. It's supposed to deal like a damage over time effect, so maybe in some cases you could hit an enemy with a shield and then just go to your left click, but in most cases you don't really need the Class Gem. You could just get it because it's a free Empowered Gem. Spirit Surge is an option. You could also use Pyro Disc just because of the movement speed that you get out of it. Cubic Curtain can give you a little bit more survivability if you need. And the Cosmic Gem in most cases is just going to be Berserk Battler just because it's going to increase your light as you damage enemies, so it makes you stronger. The only reason you would maybe use Vampirium, because it does have lifesteal that you don't really need, the only reason you'd use Vampirium is because it does give movement speed. And with that said, ladies and gentlemen, here we are again. Finally got another one of these class videos. Now, a lot of you keep asking me like which classes are coming next and what have you. I'm always doing them in linear order, which means the next one would be the Lunar Lancer. Again, apologies that these videos take so long to produce. It's not that they're like an inherently complex video to do. I just kind of have to be in the right headspace to do them effectively. And even then I still get criticisms here and there about like, you know, I had people asking and saying, hey, can you specify like which crystal ring ability is better over another and so on. In most cases, the reason why I might not go into strict specificity is because it doesn't really matter that much. It's more so about like your playstyle. Trove doesn't really have that much in terms of options for how you can end up building your classes though. Like even the tanky classes in the game, you still just build them towards DPS. Thanks for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Please be sure to smash like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, leave a comment in the comment section down below telling me what I did wrong. You can also share the video if you would kindly. You know, it always helps out when you guys help me out. Otherwise, I thought it'd be interesting for us to do some improv for this outro. First, we'll start with yes and.